My talk will be causes of violence against women and girls in conflict, and I took the liberty of focusing, of course, on the Philippine experience. So this is the outline of my presentation. I start with the definition of violence, although this was already defined, but what we see here is that it encompasses physical, sexual, and psychological harm. And again, the basis is mainly the CEDAW. Now, violence against children will show us that it's the same aspects of physical, sexual, and psychological harm, but one thing different, one additional feature is that it also encompasses abuse, neglect, or negligent treatment of children. And we find basis for this in Article 19 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We need to address this issue of violence because women and girls are particularly affected because of their status in society and their sex. Although we are told that, and for instance, the Philippine Constitution itself says that men and women are equal before the law, this is not evidenced by the daily experiences of many women. So there's a difference between formal equality and substantive equality. Gender-based violence is used as a weapon of war, as already discussed earlier. Okay, I look at the UN Security Council resolutions, and I start with Resolution 1325, adopted in October 2000. It calls for the adoption of a gender perspective that included the special needs of women and children during repatriation and resettlement, rehabilitation, reintegration, and post-conflict reconstruction. The key commitments of governments are the participation of women in all levels of decision-making, gender perspective in Secretary General reports and Security Council missions, protection of and respect for human rights of women and girls, gender perspective in conflict processes, and gender perspective in peacekeeping. UNSCR 1820, adopted in 2008, is in furtherance of UNSCR 1325, and it demands that all parties to armed conflict immediately cease from committing sexual violence against civilians and to take appropriate measures to protect women and girls. The key elements of this resolution are as follows. Number one, it explicitly links sexual violence as a tactic of war with the maintenance of international peace and security. Second, it recognizes sexual violence as a security issue to justify a security response. Three, it demands parties to armed conflict to adopt concrete protection and prevention measures. And lastly, it asserts the importance of women's participation in all processes related to ending sexual violence. There are a total of 5 UN Security Council resolutions, and the others are Resolution 1888, 1889, and 1960. I will go a bit faster, so I'll go now to the last two, Resolution 2106 and 2122. The latest resolution pertaining to women, peace, and security creates stronger measures to include women in peace processes and calls for regular briefings and reports on women, peace, and security. I go next to the conflict in Mindanao as my case study. Overview of Mindanao shows us that it is the second largest and southernmost island of the Philippines. It has a population of 21 million as of 2010. I don't know what the population is right now in Mindanao, but the Philippines just celebrated the birth of the 100 millionth baby a few days ago. I don't know if that is cause for rejoicing or otherwise, considering the limited resources that our country has. The conflict in Mindanao is one of the world's longest running conflicts, tracing back to the colonial era, and its dynamics of exploitation and resistance. Armed violence in Mindanao is multifaceted, motivated not only by ideology but by local and regional struggles over political power and resources, clan conflict, vigilantism, and opportunistic crime. A closer look at the violence reveals that most security threats come from powerful political clans and families. You have, and this is quite common in the Philippines, families that have that are very entrenched, and they have been governors, mayors, congressmen, generations after generations, and it wouldn't be so bad if they are active in politics above ground, but they too are very strong clout and often have their own private militia. Likewise, we have business interests, private security firms, non-state armed groups, and security forces. Okay. The most frequently reported source of conflict in Mindanao is between the Moros separatist groups and the government of the Republic of the Philippines. The movement is represented by two main armed groups, the MNLF and the MILF. And it is with the MILF that the Philippines has, the government rather, the Philippines has engaged in drafting the Bangsamoro Basic Law. And that, again, is one of the main things happening in the Philippines. In fact, the UN Women has focused on this, and we're doing work with them to look at how the Bangsamoro Basic Law could be drafted in such a way that the rights of women could be protected. Because oftentimes the rights of women, as well as the areas in which they are often ignored, especially in the areas of family law, may be disregarded in the effort to ensure that the basic law is passed. So we want to make sure that the rights of women, as identified in the CEDAW, will be protected in the Bangsamoro Basic Law. There is a persistent threat of localized conflict in Mindanao, usually due to clan conflict and politically related issues. In a 2002 Asia Foundation study, 43% of the respondents in Mindanao cited experiences with periodic outbursts of retaliatory violence between families and clans. And in fact, the Maguindanao massacre of 2009 is an example of this. 57 people were massacred, including about 38 journalists, and that has given rise to the Philippines getting the moniker of being the most dangerous country for journalists. And this was election-related violence also. In this case, there was a conflict between the Mangudadatus and the Ampatuans. And it was the women of the Mangudadatus clan who were on their way to the voting precincts that the ambush was done. And so majority of those who were massacred were women. What is the impact of violence in armed conflict? First, mobility. Conflict-related shifts in mobility were cited as a major concern for communities and have resulted in some degree of gender role transformation. When violence flares, people in local communities are trapped in their homes, unable to access work, schools, healthcare, or markets. Women have greater ability to move, however, because there is lesser danger that they will be mistaken as combatants or to be pressured to join insurgent groups. However, they run the risk of getting caught in the crossfire or face the threat of sexual violence or intimidation. Another impact of violence is sexual violence. There have been no official reports, however, no data, no strong fact and figures to which we can refer. However, there are anecdotal accounts, most of the time not even from the victims, but by word of mouth. The NGOs who work in that area of Mindanao tell us of their stories. In the Maguindanao massacre, it was found that 5 women victims were sexually abused. This shows that sexual violence is still being used as a war tactic. Another impact of violence is displacement. Majority of the internally displaced persons are women and children. Over the past decade, an estimated 3 million Mindanaoans have become temporarily or permanently displaced. In 2008-2009 alone, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center reported more than 600,000 civilians were displaced due to artillery shelling by government troops directed against MILF renegade commanders. Many have undergone repeated cycles of displacement, and return has been more difficult. Women and children, IDPs, are vulnerable also to exploitation. So that leads me to another impact, which is labor exploitation. Women who have been forced to run, leaving homes and resources behind, with children and elders who require care, are severely hampered in their ability to perform culturally expected tasks such as taking care of the children, cooking, doing laundry. And at the same time, the more modern expectation of helping the family earn a living. Even when work is available, IDPs constitute an easily exploited labor force because in desperation, they may be forced to carry out harsh menial labor for substandard wages. Conflict-prone areas are major sources of victims of human trafficking also. Evacuation centers have reported incidents of prostitution. The next impact of violence is the economic burdens. Conflict sharpens class inequalities, leading the communities affected to be further impoverished. When men become primary targets of violence, women are left to take on the responsibilities of generating income for the families. And again, as I pointed out earlier, the duty to provide for the family does not lessen their duty to do the more traditional tasks of women. They are forced to tend the fields and livestock alone in addition to their traditional duties, and this situation has led to fear among women of being caught in frequent crossfires or being sexually abused. This leads me to the next impact of violence, which is domestic violence. Now, because women are able to move more freely, because they have more access compared to men to, let's say, do some work and get some pay for it, because men cannot come out in the open because they could be recruited and they could also be the target of violence. Some men, at least, resent this and want to make sure that they have control over the resources that are accessed by women. And when women refuse, then they become victims of domestic violence as well. Another impact of violence is in armed conflict is recruitment. Armed conflicts are fertile ground for the recruitment of children and youth, with a view of using them either directly as combatants or indirectly as couriers, spies, yes, and messengers. And of course, we know that there is both in international humanitarian law as well as international human rights law that prohibits the recruitment of children and their involvement in armed conflict. Children, including child soldiers, have been killed during military operations to crush opposition forces, particularly members of the MILF. According to government forces, the testimonies of former NPA members revealed massive recruitment of minors aged 13 to 17 from the ranks of urban students and out-of-school peasants. And I believe that this is one of the more serious problems in Mindanao. Although the armed forces of the Philippines has reported that they do not recruit children, they have presented evidence that about 13% of children, or rather 13% of the rebel forces are composed of children. So it is not the government forces which recruits children, but the non-state actors, the MILF, MNLF, and other armed groups. But this, of course, does not excuse the Philippine government, because part of its duty is to ensure that not only state actors but non-state actors respect the ban or the prohibition against child recruitment. Causes of violence are as follows. So again, there is no single factor that can be identified. However, there are three possible factors, main factors. I will focus first on political and institutional factors. Again, we have weak state institutions. The government of the Philippines is, well, not very stable. Of course, we have a president right now who is respected for his honesty. He is not corrupt, but again, with the recent debacles pertaining to the use of funds, with the PBAF and the DAP, the acceleration program of the government, and the cross-border use of funds between the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, which has been rendered unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, has caused many people to show discontent with the government of Mr. Aquino, although again, I stress that he has not been found or even accused. There is no innuendo whatsoever of his using public funds for his own self-interest. But the fact is, the state is weak. In the Mindanao conflict, the failure of peace talks on balancing state interest and the movement towards autonomy from the armed groups result in the outbreak of hostilities. Likewise, there is weak public security. Socioeconomic factors include, well, poverty and lack of social opportunity, and these are both drivers and outcomes of the conflict. Decades of conflict have left the area among the most impoverished in the Philippines. In fact, we're accused of being a Manila-centric country where everything is deemed to be focused on the progress of Manila, and Mindanao is not really given that much attention, although much of the natural resources of the country come from Mindanao. Economic deprivation often inflames conflict, and the difficult security situation in the ARMM has hampered a broad range of economic activities. Okay, let's go now to resource and environmental factors. All armed conflicts are funded. There can be no unfunded armed conflict, or it wouldn't progress, it wouldn't prosper. Such funding often comes from illicit sources and activities. Greed and corruption, best seen in the private militias of Mindanao, where political power is concentrated in a clan and violence is employed to sustain and maintain that political power. Now, allow me to show you remedies available in Philippine law. Okay. First, we have the legal framework that supports this. We have the 1987 Constitution that recognizes the role of women in nation building and ensures fundamental equality before the law of men and women. But as I pointed out earlier, this is formal equality, but there is still a problem in substantive equality. The Constitution of the Philippines likewise says that the state shall adopt an integrated and comprehensive approach to health development and give priority to the needs of women and children. Likewise, the state shall protect working women by providing safe and healthful working conditions, taking into account their material functions and such facilities and opportunities that will enhance their welfare and enable them to realize their full potential. Laws have been passed to address the situation and vulnerability of children. Foremost is Republic Act 7610, also known as the Anti-Child Abuse Law. It protects children from all forms of abuse, exploitation, discrimination, and other conditions prejudicial to their development. And this, of course, would include armed conflict situations. There is a wider safety net cast over children, including those in especially difficult circumstances. And again, this would include children in armed conflict situations, and those belonging to indigenous communities. Article 10, Section 11 of this law says that children in situations of armed conflict are placed in two categories: those who are recruited as combatants or child soldiers, as well as those who are non-combatants and together with their families, however, are caught in the crossfire. So this results in the families being driven away from their homes, and worse, the children are separated from their parents. Now, for child soldiers, the law contains a prohibition on the recruitment of children. Once the government gets custody of the child, a set of rights click in. The child is informed of his constitutionally protected rights and treated humanely. The Department of Social Welfare and Development is a primary agency of government which should take custody of the children. During the hearing, if the court finds that the child committed acts as charged against him, the penalty is set aside, suspended, and further proceedings are likewise suspended, and the child is instead placed in the custody of the DSWD. Now, for the second category of children, those caught in war zones, evacuation programs are mandated. And the Philippines has a Philippine National Strategy Framework, and it's called Child 21, that focuses on two components rather, of prevention, advocacy, and mobilization. The Philippines, going back to what we've done for women, the Philippines affirms commitment to the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and we have the Philippine National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security, or the NAP. The NAP is a 6-year plan from 2010 to 2016 with 4 interrelated and complementary purposes. The first of which is protection and prevention, to ensure the protection of women's human rights and prevention of violation of these rights in armed conflict and post-conflict situations. It will address the actual situations of women and girls on the ground and provide them with a comprehensive assistance package toward healing and empowerment. And part of this would be provision for basic social services, including legal services and livelihood support. Initiatives indicated in this section will be implemented in partnership with the local government units, related government agencies, and other local stakeholders, including civil society organizations. Second is empowerment and participation. To empower women and ensure their active and meaningful participation in areas of peace building, peacekeeping, conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and post-conflict reconstruction. The establishment of enabling mechanism and environment, as well as adopting affirmative actions that will accelerate women's full participation in all peace efforts. There are also local existing structures that have to be tapped and revitalized in order to empower women. The third is promotion and mainstreaming. And the idea here is to promote and mainstream gender perspectives in all aspects of conflict prevention. In fact, I was invited to speak before, well, this is the AFP. It's a minor thing, part which I, in fact, found a bit odd. After flag ceremony, they asked me to speak, and I was thinking, while they're standing under the heat of the sun, like, and in the Philippines, of course, it's very hot. But the topic that they wanted was on gender. Yes. So I said, oh, this is a good idea. And of course, this is not an armed conflict, but I think that it's important to mainstream. Others say that gender mainstreaming is something that you can do without. That the topic of gender is just extra, and it's really not the concern of men, but of women. So I'm glad that the AFP, and likewise the Philippine National Police, the civilian, Armed Forces of the Philippines. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, as well as the PNP, Philippine National Police. Okay. Gender responsiveness and sensitivity will be the core messages and content of all intervention packages. Changing cultural biases, perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as eliminating gender discriminations and stereotyping will be the primary intent of this section. In fact, one thing also, because I've been active in the drafting of the implementing rules and regulations of the Magna Carta of Women, we trained government offices, including the DFA, sorry, I keep on giving acronyms, Department of Foreign Affairs and other government agencies on the Magna Carta of Women. Because again, this is a relatively new law passed in 2010. And one focus is the elimination of gender discrimination. For instance, one issue that has arisen is the provision which requires that about 50% of employees should be women. So the gender balance is something that some offices question. Fourth, capacity development, monitoring, and reporting. To institutionalize a system to monitor, evaluate, and report on the implementation of the NAP in order to enhance accountability for successful implementation and the achievement of its goals. It will ensure that the content of the NAP or the National Action Plan is properly and efficiently implemented in the spirit of transparency, accountability, and good governance. Now, what I did, and this is the last part, is to look at the key commitments in the resolutions. And on the right side, you will see Philippine laws and actions. So, as to the commitment of participation of women in all levels of decision making, we have the creation of the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace Process. And then we have the promotion and integration of women as full and equal partners of men in development and nation building. As to the goal of increased voluntary and financial, technical, logistical support for gender-sensitive training efforts, we also have the Magna Carta of Women, which would be the main law passed. And then as to the goal of taking special measures to protect women and children from gender-based violence, the Philippines has passed several laws on the family courts, which gives that court original jurisdiction to try and decide cases of domestic violence. And we also have Republic Act 8551, which created the Women's Desk in the Philippine National Police. As to the resolution's goal of putting an end to impunity, then we have several laws on this. The law expanding the definition of rape and the act defining violence against women and children. As to the goal of the adoption of a gender perspective on programs and peace negotiations, we have Executive Order 865 on the creation of the National Steering Committee on Women. So in closing, I would say that the Philippines has taken enormous steps in addressing violence against women and children in conflict situations based on evidence gathered, and what we see is that there are several laws that have been passed to attain these goals. However, more have to be done, especially the implementation and monitoring of the status of women and children in conflict, and there is an immediate need for the Philippines to come up with a system of tracking and reporting of women and children in conflict. Thank you very much.